She didn't stumble. She didn't trip, and you know it. Because pain like that doesn't come from a slip of the hand. It comes from a steady one. Practiced, intentional, and terrifyingly precise. There were no knives, no screaming, no slammed doors, no public explosion that might have warned you to run. Only the kind of silence that seeps in through kindness. The kind of betrayal that's dressed in calm tones, polite smiles, and eyes that watch you bleed without blinking. You didn't see the cut at first, because she didn't swing, she carved. Not all violence shows itself in bruises. Some arrive wrapped in love, sharpened by familiarity, and camouflaged as care. And that's why it hurt more than anything else ever has. Because it didn't come from an enemy. It came from someone who knew exactly where your softest parts lived, and didn't hesitate when the moment came to use them against you. You've probably told yourself what good people tell themselves. Maybe it wasn't on purpose. Maybe she didn't realize. Maybe it was the pressure, or the past, or something broken in her that she never meant to point in your direction. But that's the lie we tell ourselves when the truth is too shattering to hold all at once. Because the truth is this: she saw you, not as an accident, but as a calculation. She observed your loyalty, and she made a choice. She watched the way you gave, and she decided it was safer to take. She listened to how you forgave and concluded that hurting you came without consequence. And now, here you are, standing in that quiet place between not wanting to hate her and not knowing how to respect yourself if you let her back in again. Caught not between revenge and forgiveness, but between two far more dangerous extremes, choosing your dignity or sacrificing it quietly in the name of a love that only ever knew how to take. This isn't about holding a grudge. This is about holding a boundary that was never respected, about building a gate where there used to be an open door, and finally understanding that some people don't break you by mistake. They break you by design, and then stand by to watch you question yourself for noticing it. And if that sounds harsh, it's only because no one else has told you the truth this clearly. Not your friends, not your therapist, not the endless advice threads that say, maybe you're overthinking it. But here, on this channel, in this space, we don't hide behind soft language when the damage has been surgical. We name things as they are. Because healing doesn't come from poetic illusions. It comes from precision, from clarity, from discipline, from boundaries carved in the granite of your own worth. What you're going to hear in this video is not a survival guide. You've already survived. This is a resurrection, a reclamation. This is what it sounds like when a man grows a spine where there used to be only hope, when the soul stops begging and starts building. Because what they did to you was not an emotional accident. It was a decision. And what you do now is the only part of the story that still belongs to you. And if you've been quietly bleeding beneath a polite smile, if you've been carrying a heartbreak that no one saw because it was delivered without noise, without spectacle, without blood on the floor, just that cold, sharp hollowness that follows betrayal masked as intimacy, then you're not lost, brother. You're just waking up. And that wake up doesn't require rage. It doesn't need a dramatic exit or a final showdown or even an apology. It requires one thing and one thing only: the ability to see clearly and the courage to walk away without explanation, without guilt, and without offering them a second opportunity to destroy what's finally starting to heal. This channel, True Stoic Way, was not made for the loud, the performative, or the self-pitying. It was made for men like you. Men who were broken. Slowly, men who were taught that silence meant submission. Men who once believed that being kind meant being weak, and are now learning that calm is a weapon, clarity is power, and silence is a final sentence. So if you've ever chosen stillness over screaming, dignity over drama, boundaries over begging, and peace over permission, then you're already on the path, and this space is for you. Subscribe to True Stoic Way, not because you need validation, but because it's time you stopped fighting this battle alone. Welcome back to yourself. There's a kind of harm that doesn't come with screaming, and doesn't leave you with visible scars, yet somehow manages to bury itself so deeply in your psyche that you start questioning your own memory, your own instincts, even your own sanity. And that kind of harm doesn't happen by accident, because people don't stumble into patterns of destruction, they design them. She didn't get emotional. She got strategic. You see, emotional abuse, the real kind, the kind you don't even realize is abuse until long after it's done, rarely looks like rage or chaos or broken plates on the floor. It looks like carefully timed silence. It looks like praise followed by confusion. It looks like small criticisms disguised as concern. It looks like gaslighting so subtle, so surgically delivered, that you begin to ask yourself if maybe you really did overreact, if maybe your needs were too much, if maybe the whole damn thing really was your fault. But it wasn't, because these patterns don't emerge from nowhere, they emerge from intent. And intent hides in the details, in the delayed responses that train you to chase, in the cold withdrawal that forces you to beg, in the constant comparison that keeps you feeling almost enough but never quite. And once you're in that loop, once you've been baited and hooked and tethered to their emotional rhythm, they don't even need to push anymore. You shrink yourself willingly. You silence yourself preemptively. You apologize for things that, deep down, you know aren't even yours to carry. They studied you, not because they loved you, but because they saw what parts of you could be used against you. Your patience, your compassion, your loyalty, your belief in potential, your hope that love could heal what character has clearly abandoned. And they turn all of it into a weapon. And if you're still thinking, but maybe it wasn't intentional, ask yourself this: did the lies happen once, or did they repeat with precision? Did the blame always return to you, no matter who created the damage? Did you constantly feel like you had to explain yourself, to defend your feelings, to beg for empathy that should have come freely? Because real mistakes don't form patterns. Real mistakes don't require recovery. They require apology once, clear, direct, followed by change. But what you endured wasn't a one-time misstep, it was a repeated cycle. And cycles always tell the truth of what someone really values. A person who forgets your birthday once is careless. A person who forgets your worth consistently is calculated. A person who accidentally lies again and again isn't forgetful. They're testing how much you'll tolerate and what it takes to get you back in line. And every time you forgive without discernment, every time you excuse the familiar wound just because it arrives in a different tone, you reinforce the illusion that your boundaries are flexible, your self-worth negotiable, and your energy available to anyone who knows how to ask for it the right way. This is how predators move, not with violence, but with subtle erosion. They don't need to shout. They whisper just enough to make you question what you know. They don't deny the truth outright. They twist it just slightly, enough to leave you doubting yourself instead of them. They don't need to fight for control when you've already handed it to them in the form of endless compassion, unlimited chances, and the belief that your goodness can somehow fix their refusal to grow. And maybe the hardest truth to admit is this: you weren't confused. You saw the red flags. You felt the imbalance. You noticed the manipulations, the double standards, the blame games, the apologies. That sounded right but felt hollow. You felt it all, but you chose to rationalize it, to spiritualize it, to forgive it, not because you were weak, but because you were holding onto the image of who they could be instead of confronting who they really were. And that's where the real pain lives, not just in what they did, but in what you had to deny in yourself in order to stay. The truth is, when someone harms you with intent, the damage is not just in the act itself, but in the spiritual distortion that follows. The way it rewires your sense of worth, your perception of reality, and your ability to trust your gut. And that kind of injury doesn't heal with time alone. It heals with confrontation, not with them, but with the truth you've been avoiding. Because the enemy wasn't wearing a mask, they were wearing familiarity. And you wanted to believe the version of them that spoke softly, not the one that acted coldly. But actions don't lie. Patterns don't lie. Only we do. To ourselves. And until you're willing to see manipulation for what it is, to name gaslighting without softening it, to call weaponized charm a tactic instead of a personality, you'll stay vulnerable to it, no matter how much wisdom you read or how many quotes you save. The Stoics taught us that suffering often begins where perception ends, that clarity is freedom, and that discernment, not emotional endurance, is the highest form of strength. So if you find yourself constantly exhausted in a relationship that never seems to change, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've been tricked into believing that loyalty means tolerating damage, as long as it's delivered quietly. But loyalty without limits is not virtue. It's a death sentence. A silent one, a slow one, and one only you can stop. So this is your invitation to stop romanticizing dysfunction, to stop dressing cruelty in the language of care, and to stop assuming that someone who knew how to damage you is somehow still worthy of access to what remains. You weren't loved recklessly, you were used efficiently. And now that you see it, truly see it, the question is no longer, why did they do it? The question is, how much longer will you keep opening the door to someone who has shown you exactly what they do with access? That's not bitterness. That's not cynicism. That's emotional intelligence. Because the most dangerous lie isn't the one they told you. It's the one you believed. That your kindness could change someone committed to chaos. It can't. It won't. It never did. Forgiveness, in its truest form, is not a gesture of weakness, not an open invitation for those who broke you to re-enter your life under the pretense of remorse, and certainly not an endorsement of the pain they caused. It is, instead, a quiet revolution inside the soul. A firm yet silent decision that says, I will no longer bleed for what was never mine to carry in the first place. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you're no longer willing to let their shadow define the architecture of your peace. Because you've grown tired of holding pain that wasn't yours to begin with. And because your spirit, weathered as it may be, finally understands that carrying resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die. True forgiveness does not require reconciliation. It is not a bridge back to what once was. It is a locked door, nailed shut with memory, sealed with clarity, and guarded by the realization that once someone has weaponized access, re-entry is no longer an act of grace. It is an act of self-betrayal. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not smiling through clenched teeth or pretending the betrayal didn't shake your bones. It is not allowing them to rewrite the past in softer ink so it stings less when they revisit it. Forgiveness is simply this: the refusal to let their damage keep echoing in your life. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do, not for them, but for yourself, is to say, "You are no longer welcome in my thoughts, my plans, or my peace. I forgive you, but I close the door behind you." The Stoics understood this better than most, that life will not spare you from pain, but it does offer you the freedom to choose how long you carry it, how deeply you embed it into your identity, and how fiercely you allow it to shape your next breath. And in that choice lies your liberation. To forgive is not to say, "It's okay." It's to say, "It happened. It hurt. I learned. And now I release it." Release, not to absolve them, not to erase them, not to invite them back into the sanctuary they shattered, but to release yourself from the loops that play at midnight, from the inner dialogues that never end, from the emotional shackles that bind you to a past you cannot change, and from the ghost of who you were when you still believed their words more than your own intuition. And perhaps the hardest part isn't the pain they caused, but the realization that healing from it doesn't come with the apology you deserve, or the closure you were promised, or the understanding you begged for. It comes from you, from the moment you choose to stop waiting for them to make it right, from the moment you accept that they may never acknowledge the wreckage they left behind, and from the moment you realize that peace is not granted, it is claimed by force if necessary, and protected like sacred territory. You do not need their validation to release their grip. You do not need their recognition to reclaim your clarity. You do not need their remorse to begin again. Forgiveness is not a signal flare that tells them it's safe to come back. It is the closing of the gate, the drawing of the line, the unmistakable silence that says, "I am healed enough to remember, and strong enough never to return." And if they ever come knocking, wondering why your heart no longer opens to their name, you don't owe them an explanation, because forgiveness doesn't always come with conversation. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of a life that no longer revolves around the damage they once caused. You can forgive and still walk away. You can release and still remain silent. You can wish them healing and still choose never to witness it. That is not cruelty, it is sovereignty. Because once you've seen the truth, once you've learned the difference between apology and manipulation, between change and performance, between guilt and genuine growth, you no longer let people talk their way back into places their actions disqualified them from. Forgiveness, then, becomes a boundary, not a weakness. A boundary that does not move when they cry. A boundary that does not shift when they confess. A boundary that does not collapse when they say all the right things in all the right tones. Because you now know that words are currency. Manipulators spend freely when their access is at risk. You're no longer looking for closure in their words. You're no longer waiting for the truth through their mouth. You've learned to find freedom in your voice, the one that calmly says, "Enough, I am done carrying you." So forgive, but do it with clarity. Forgive, but not at the cost of your peace. Forgive, but never let the same storm back through the door just because the sky looks calm today. And when doubt creeps in, as it always will, when you question if maybe you were too harsh, too distant, too final, remember this. They had access to your soul, and they still chose destruction. They didn't change when they had the chance. They didn't protect what was sacred. They didn't pause before pressing deeper into the wound. So now that you've risen from the wreckage, you owe them nothing but silence. That is forgiveness at its highest level, not performed. Not performed, not even explained, just quietly embodied, like a fortress of self-respect, with walls built not from hatred, but from lessons finally learned. Because the healed version of you, that version does not hand out keys to those who once set fire to the house. We live in a world that often teaches us, subtly, repeatedly, and with the weight of unspoken rules, that to be good is to be agreeable, that to be kind is to be accommodating, that to be forgiving is to make room for other people's dysfunction, as if it were a virtue. And the more quietly you carry the weight of other people's damage, the more noble you are seen to be. But let me tell you now, with clarity sharpened by experience, that there are two kinds of good in this world, and only one of them will leave you standing. The first kind is loud in silence, unshakable in principle, defined not by how much it gives away, but by how fiercely it protects what matters. And this kind of goodness, the kind anchored in self-respect and guarded by discernment, knows how to say no without flinching, how to draw a line without apology, and how to remove access without raising its voice, because it understands that true kindness is not the absence of anger, but the ability to channel that anger with surgical precision toward the right person, at the right time, and with the strength to stop once justice is served. Not vengeance. The second kind of goodness, the one most praised, most exploited, most easily broken, is the kind built on fear. Not strength, built on the desperate need to be liked, to be chosen, to be seen as soft and safe and selfless, even when it means swallowing disrespect like it's medicine. Even when it means shrinking to fit inside someone else's chaos, even when it means sacrificing truth for the illusion of peace, because somewhere along the way, you were taught that being kind meant being quiet, and being quiet meant being good. But it doesn't, because kindness without boundaries is not virtue. It's vulnerability left unguarded. It's compassion turned inward like a weapon, and it's the fastest way to become a sponge for other people's damage, to let them drip their chaos into your life until you can't tell where their pain ends and your self-worth begins. You are not good because you tolerate what breaks you. You are not kind because you stay where your dignity is dying. And you are not strong because you pretend that being used is some kind of spiritual calling. In truth, the strongest people are not the ones who never feel rage. They are the ones who have mastered it, the ones who hold it like a sword they choose not to draw, the ones who know that real power is not in the strike, but in the restraint. And that silence, when chosen from clarity rather than fear, can be more devastating than any scream. You don't need to prove your kindness to those who mistook it for weakness. You don't need to perform empathy for those who weaponized it. And you don't owe access to those who drained you in the name of connection. who praised your softness only because it made you easier to manipulate, who told you that your goodness was beautiful while feeding off your inability to say no. Because real kindness, Stoic kindness, is not soft, not fragile, not endlessly available. It is measured, intentional, and backed by standards that do not waver with tears or guilt or sentimentality. And yes, there will be people, many of them, who call you cold when you stop letting them walk through you like a hallway, who accuse you of being cruel when you finally set the boundary they never expected, who tell you you've changed because they can no longer use the version of you that had no armor. But that is not your concern, because the version of you who once confused people pleasing with peace has finally evolved. You do not need to explain your shift to those who benefited from your silence. You do not need to justify your growth to those who lost access to the old you. The version who kept showing up even after being ignored, who kept giving even after being diminished, who kept choosing to believe in potential long after evidence said otherwise. There is no reward for suffering silently. There is no trophy for tolerating the intolerable. There is no medal for being the most understanding in a room full of users. Can be kind and still say no. You can be compassionate and still walk away. You can be forgiving and still lock the door behind you. Because the highest form of kindness is not how you treat those who praise you. It's how you protect yourself from those who drain you. And if someone calls you heartless because you stop giving them permission to hurt you, let them speak. Their words say more about their sense of entitlement than your character. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them be confused. Let them twist your distance into cruelty if they must. It doesn't matter, because you no longer bend yourself to fit inside the narratives of those who once mistook your goodness for free labor. You are not here to make people comfortable. You are here to stand whole. And that means sometimes your kindness will have teeth. It will be cloaked in silence. It will wear armor. It will move with stillness that unnerves the ones who thrived off your old compliance. And when they say, "You used to be so nice," smile softly and know that what they really mean is, you used to be easier to control. So if you're walking that path right now, the path of reclaiming your strength without losing your softness, the path of saying no without losing your soul, the path of finally redefining kindness not as martyrdom but as mastery, then know this: you're not alone. You're not cold. You're not wrong. You are living the Stoic way, the way of deliberate kindness, of disciplined peace, of boundaries set not from bitterness, but from love for yourself. And if that resonates with something inside you, if a quiet part of you just exhaled because someone finally put words to the way you've been feeling, then this space was made for you. You're walking the true Stoic way now. Subscribe, not because you need permission to be who you are becoming, but because you deserve to be surrounded by others who no longer apologize for becoming unshakable. There comes a moment, not marked by fireworks or fury, not preceded by an argument or a declaration, not wrapped in final words or dramatic exits, but a moment just the same, clear and cutting and absolute, when you decide, quietly and without permission, that you will no longer explain yourself to people who twisted your words, who weaponized your empathy, who thrived on your emotional reactions like leeches feeding off your confusion. And in that moment, you go silent, and though they'll never admit it, that silence terrifies them, Because silence, when chosen from clarity and not from fear, is not emptiness. It is a statement louder than any scream, sharper than any insult, more final than any explanation. A statement that says, I owe you nothing. Not my words, not my energy, not my chaos, not my pain. The manipulator depends not on your presence, but on your participation, because they know they can't thrive in peace. They need the storm to stay relevant, and if they can't make you love them, they'll settle for making you argue, because attention, whether loving or furious, is still fuel to someone who's built their identity around control. But when you choose silence, strategic, calm, disciplined silence, you cut the supply. You stop justifying. You stop defending. You stop reacting. And in doing so, you starve the very machine they've used to dominate you. Because you begin to understand that not every lie deserves a rebuttal. Not every accusation deserves a counterpoint. Not every manipulation deserves your emotional labor. And more importantly, you realize that if you have to yell to be heard, you're already in the wrong room. You no longer explain your boundaries to people who were committed to violating them. You no longer fight to be understood by someone who was never listening in the first place. You no longer perform pain in hopes that the person who caused it might suddenly feel empathy. Instead, you let silence do the talking, and in its echo, they begin to hear everything they tried to ignore. Silence is not the absence of communication, it is the end of negotiation. It is what happens when someone who was once generous with words decides that not every dialogue is worthy of continuation. That some connections deserve to die quietly, not because there was no love, but because love was never enough to justify staying where you were constantly misunderstood, misused, or dismissed. To the manipulator, silence feels like abandonment. To the healed, it feels like oxygen, because when you've spent months, maybe years, being baited into conflict, into circular conversations, into loops where you explain and re-explain the same boundary, the same pain, the same line crossed, over and over again, and they still somehow made you feel guilty for bleeding, then silence becomes more than a strategy. It becomes your freedom. And here's the truth they don't want you to realize. They don't fear your rage, they expect it. They don't fear your accusations. They've already prepared their counterattacks. What they fear is your stillness. Because when you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. When you stop engaging, you stop being useful. When you stop speaking, you force them to finally sit with their own noise. And most of them have spent a lifetime avoiding that. Silence is not passive. It is potent. It is what separates the reactive from the resolved, the victim from the sovereign, the emotionally hijacked from the psychologically free. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to retaliate to be strong. You don't need to make noise to prove that you are no longer available to be manipulated. Because the most dangerous man in the room is never the one yelling. It's the one who no longer needs to explain himself. And if you think silence makes you weak, remember this. Silence is the final move of those who have already won. You don't win by exposing them. You win by no longer needing to. You don't win by proving a point. You win by no longer letting your energy be extracted just because someone feels entitled to your attention. And you certainly don't win by clinging to the illusion that closure must be mutual. Because closure is not an event. It's not a conversation. And it's not a confession that finally makes sense of it all. Closure is what happens when you walk away and stop waiting for the apology you were never going to get. So let them talk. Let them spin. Let them drown in the silence you left behind. Not because you want to hurt them, but because you no longer want to hurt yourself trying to be heard by someone who only listens when it benefits them. Let your stillness be your sentence. Let your quiet be your final act of clarity. Let your absence echo louder than your presence ever did. Because silence, real silence, isn't a retreat. It's a reclaiming. It's the moment you stop dancing to the tune of emotional chaos. It's the day you stop letting your peace be hijacked by someone else's drama. It's the decision that says, I no longer perform pain for the amusement of someone who never deserved a front row seat in my life to begin with. And the moment you step into that, fully, without guilt, without flinching, without needing to be understood, the mask begins to crack on the other side. They can't call you unstable anymore. They can't twist your words when you offer none. They can't spin the narrative when you stop showing up for the performance. In the absence of your chaos, their control dies. And though they'll scramble, though they'll bait, though they'll cry or rage or guilt trip their way back toward the echo of the power they once held, you will not answer. Because you have finally remembered that you don't need to win the fight. You just need to stop entering the arena. They don't come back because they miss you. They don't show up again because they've changed. And they certainly don't reach out because they finally understand the pain they caused. They come back for one reason, and one reason only: to see if they still have access. To test if the door they once kicked open still creaks at their touch. To verify if the version of you who once bent over backwards for breadcrumbs still exists somewhere behind your new silence. Because what they want is not reunion. What they want is relevance. What they crave isn't connection, it's control. And if they can't have your love, they'll settle for your confusion. So they reappear, not always with flowers, not always with declarations of love or grand apologies, but often with something far more dangerous: a whisper of familiarity. A look that says, remember who we used to be. A message that lingers in ambiguity, just enough to awaken your hope, but not enough to deliver accountability. This is not remorse. This is manipulation, repackaged as reflection. And it often comes dressed in one of three disguises: the guilt trip, the victim narrative, and the breadcrumb trail, each designed not to heal, but to hook. The guilt trip arrives first, subtle, almost imperceptible if you're not looking for it. A statement dropped in your inbox at midnight. A text that says, I miss us, instead of, I'm sorry. A comment about how cold you've become, about how much they're struggling now that you're no longer around. And it's not an apology. It's an accusation wrapped in sorrow. A way to suggest that your boundary is cruelty, that your silence is punishment, that your growth is abandonment. And if that doesn't work, the victim mask appears. A calculated reversal of roles, a script flipped so cleanly you almost forget who hurt who. A message that says, I opened up to you and you left me. Or, you said you'd always be there and now you're gone. As if your very act of self-preservation was the real betrayal. As if your decision to walk away from emotional exhaustion somehow makes you the villain in the story. They wrote to preserve their own denial, but the most seductive trap, the one that pulls the strongest among us back into the cycle, is breadcrumbing. Those small deliberate gestures of affection, of change, of effort that never quite become consistent, never quite build toward resolution, never quite cross the threshold into responsibility, just enough to keep hope alive, just enough to suggest progress without ever delivering transformation. They might say, "Let's start over," or "I've been working on myself," or "I've missed you more than you know." And they'll say it with just the right tone, just the right vulnerability, just the right emotional inflection to make you pause and wonder if maybe this time will be different. But it won't be, because this is not change, it's reset. It's not remorse, it's recall. It's not healing, it's strategy. They aren't here to rebuild, they're here to resume. And what they want isn't a relationship. What they want is a role. Your role in their life, where you once carried the emotional weight, where you once supplied the energy, the patience, the benefit of the doubt, the loyalty that outlasted logic. And when you stopped, when you finally shut the door, they didn't mourn the love, they mourned the control. Because here is the truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. They don't want you, they want you to still need them. They don't want reconciliation, they want leverage. They don't want to fix what they broke. They want to erase the consequences of breaking it. And the most terrifying thing for someone addicted to control is not your anger, not your confrontation, not even your rejection. It is your indifference. It is your peace. It is the moment they realize you no longer react, no longer chase, no longer wait by the phone, or craft thoughtful replies, or replay their promises. Late at night, it's the realization that you are no longer available, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. They thought you'd always respond. They thought they'd always have a way back in. They thought your kindness was permanent, that your forgiveness was guaranteed, that your love would override your logic. But they were wrong, because now you've seen the pattern, you've mapped the loop, you've realized that it always starts with longing, moves through confusion, lands in reconnection, and ends in disappointment. Again and again and again. And the only way to win is not to break the pattern, but to exit it completely. You break the cycle not by changing them, but by changing the part of you that still wanted to believe their words over your experience. The part of you that still mistook potential for proof. The part of you that still confused effort with evolution. You break it by recognizing that every time you let someone come back without doing the work, without showing consistent change, without facing what they caused, you are not offering compassion. You are offering yourself up for another round of slow destruction. You break it by choosing peace that does not require negotiation. You break it by saying, "I see you clearly now, and that is enough." So when they come back, and they always do, don't look at the timing of their return. Look at the consistency of their absence. Don't listen for the words they know you want to hear. Watch for the actions that never came. Don't mistake their discomfort for growth, or their nostalgia for love, because love is not a feeling that returns when silence becomes unbearable. It is a choice that remains when there is nothing left to gain. And if what brought them back was the silence, the void, the loss of your energy, then let them keep feeling it, because you are no longer the man who explains why you needed space. You are no longer the man who proves why his boundary was necessary. You are no longer the man who reopens doors just because someone remembers how good it felt to stand inside. You are the man who broke the pattern, not with anger, Not with revenge, not with desperate pleas for accountability, but with stillness, with clarity, and with the unwavering conviction that love without respect is not worth repeating. Closure does not come from their apology. It comes from your decision to stop needing one. And the sooner you realize that the people who harmed you deliberately, methodically, and with full awareness of the damage they caused, are often the least capable of offering you closure, the sooner you begin to understand that healing is not a collaboration, not a conversation, and certainly not a shared resolution. It is a solitary act of spiritual discipline, rooted not in explanation, but in release. They won't give you closure. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Because the longer you wait, the longer you linger, the longer you stay emotionally tethered to their absence, to their silence, to the story that never got its final chapter, the more control they retain, not by speaking, but by not speaking. Not by clarity, but by confusion. Not by presence, but by the echo of what was left unsaid. You think you're waiting for answers, but what you're really waiting for is a reason to stop hoping, a justification to finally let go, a signal that says it's okay to walk away now. But the irony is that very waiting is what keeps the wound open, what keeps your power suspended in midair, what keeps your mind replaying possibilities that were never real to begin with. They won't come back with closure because they know you're still looking for it. And as someone who feeds on your emotional dependence, your uncertainty is a currency, your longing is a tether, your endless search for clarity is the hook that keeps you standing at a door they already locked from the other side. So if you're still checking their stories, still reading old messages, still listening for footsteps in your silence, still writing letters you never send, still drafting paragraphs in your head explaining what you would say if they ever came back, know this: you're not seeking closure, you're delaying the truth. And the truth is not that they owe you. The truth is that you owe yourself the end. Because the moment you realize that their silence is not a question mark, it's a period, something in you shifts. The moment you stop waiting for them to validate what you lived through, stop waiting for them to finally feel what they made you feel, stop hoping that the very person who left you in pieces will be the one to put you back together. That is the moment closure begins, not with their words, but with your withdrawal from needing them. You don't need a reason. You don't need a final conversation. You don't need the satisfaction of hearing them say, "I was wrong." You don't even need them to admit what they did. You only need one thing: peace that doesn't depend on their participation. Closure is not an explanation. Closure is the moment you stop checking who views your silence. It's the moment you stop rewriting the past into something softer than it really was. It's the moment you choose dignity over drama, clarity over closure, and reality over romanticized potential. You don't get closure by reopening the wound. You get it by outgrowing the version of you who still needed them to care, who still thought love could fix character, who still mistook absence for ambiguity, when in fact, the silence they left behind was the answer they were too cowardly to say out loud. Because if they cared, they never would have made closure necessary. If they respected you, they wouldn't have let things end in silence. And if they were capable of offering healing, they would have protected you before they harmed you. So stop interpreting their absence as unfinished business. Start seeing it for what it is: a message louder than any words they ever spoke. They didn't forget you. They chose not to face you. They weren't lost, they were watching, measuring whether your self-worth was strong enough to stay gone. And now that you've walked away, truly walked away, not just physically but energetically, spiritually, mentally, you realize that you never needed closure from them. You needed truth, and you already had it. You just didn't want to believe it. And now that you do, you stop looking for closure at their door, and you start building it at your own, brick by brick, breath by breath, by grieving what you hoped would happen and honoring what actually did. Because closure isn't about the past making sense. It's about choosing peace in the absence of sense. It's about saying to yourself, even if I never understand why, I still choose to be free. And when you do that, when you stand in the center of your own pain and choose not to wait for anyone to come rescue you, you become closure. That you become the end of the story they refuse to finish. You become the punctuation they withheld. You become the silence that speaks everything they were too dishonest to say. So if you're still waiting, stop. Not because your feelings don't matter, not because your questions weren't valid, not because the pain wasn't real, but because the person who caused it was never going to be the one to heal it. That was always your job. And if you're ready to reclaim that power, not in rage, not in revenge, but in full clarity and composure, then you've already begun the Stoic path. Because in Stoicism, closure is not about who left, it's about who you choose to become when they're gone. And if you're learning to find that ending inside yourself, instead of inside someone else, then know this: you're already walking the right way. You're walking the true Stoic way. The most painful truth, the one you've likely been avoiding, massaging, reframing, softening with spiritual language or emotional excuses, is that the reason you're still entertaining the idea of giving them another chance isn't because they've earned it, not because they've grown, not because their actions show genuine transformation, but because you still haven't let go of the fantasy that they might one day become the person you believed they were capable of being. Don't want them back. You want the version of them that existed only in potential. You want the version they hinted at when things were good, when the smiles were real, when the effort seemed mutual, when the chemistry drowned out the red flags. And so now, in the aftermath, in the wreckage, in the quiet moments when you remember their eyes before they turned cold, you convince yourself that maybe, just maybe, all of that was real. And if it was real once, maybe it can be again. But what you're really doing, if we're brutally honest, is using their potential as a way to delay the funeral of your own illusion. You're stalling the death of the story you told yourself about who they could be, because letting go of them isn't just about losing a person, it's about burying a future that only ever existed in your imagination. And we get attached to those futures. We invest in them. We defend them. We water them even as they rot. And we call it loyalty or forgiveness or unconditional love, when in reality, it's just fear dressed up in beautiful language. Fear that if we walk away, we were wrong about them. Fear that if we let go, they'll finally become everything we hoped, but for someone else. Fear that all the time, energy, emotion, and sacrifice we gave will amount to nothing if we don't at least try one more time. But one more time becomes a habit, and habit becomes a prison. And suddenly, you're not loving them. You're negotiating with your own loneliness. You're not choosing them. You're bargaining with a version of yourself that still believes love means staying, even when it's killing you in slow, quiet increments. Because giving someone a second chance doesn't just reopen the door, it reopens the part of you that had to close to survive them the first time. And if they haven't done the work, not talked about it, not promised it, not cried about it, but demonstrated it consistently in discomfort, then what you're offering isn't grace. It's self-abandonment. You are not required to keep extending opportunities to someone who keeps showing you that your pain was not a wake-up call, only a temporary interruption to their comfort. They cried. They missed you. They said they were sorry, but did they change? Did they own what they did without minimizing, without blaming, without deflecting, without waiting for your empathy to do the emotional labor for them? Did they sit with the impact, not just the consequence? Because unless the answer is yes, unless you see evidence, not emotion, accountability, not affection, then offering them a second chance is not love. It is an invitation for repeat harm disguised as hope. And hope, when untethered from reality, becomes a dangerous drug, one that keeps you attached to loops that have already proven fatal to your peace. Stoic wisdom teaches us that to see clearly is to live freely, and that freedom begins where delusion ends. So no matter how gentle they sound now, no matter how warm their words, no matter how much they claim to have reflected in your absence, if their absence didn't lead them to full responsibility, to changed behavior, to humility without conditions, then they are not coming back to love you. They are coming back to reset the game. And every day you delay the decision to close the chapter fully, every moment you leave the door even slightly ajar in the name of compassion or faith or what if, you are not buying time. You are selling pieces of your future in exchange for fragments of a past that never truly served you. You're not being kind. You're being haunted. And healing means walking away, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, reclaiming all the energy you once used to justify their potential, and replanting it into a life that no longer bends for someone who broke you. Because forgiveness, though noble, is not unconditional. And access, though seductive, must be earned with evidence, with effort, and with consistency that survives the moment. So when the part of you starts whispering, maybe they've changed, remind yourself, that's not your soul speaking. It's your unhealed hope, and you don't owe your future to the person who taught you how to lose yourself gently. What you owe is peace, and peace only grows when you stop hoping someone becomes what they were never willing to be. They say, "You're too nice," and you hear it as a compliment, a quiet affirmation that your softness is seen, your compassion appreciated, your patience somehow rare. But what they're really saying, whether they admit it or not, is that they know you won't leave, that you'll bend before you break, that you'll carry the weight even when it's not yours, and most dangerously, that they can hurt you. And you will still stay, because you're too nice isn't praise. It's a forecast. It's a warning cloaked in flattery, a way of signaling that they've assessed your boundaries, or rather, the lack of them, and found them pliable, moldable, forgiving to a fault. And the moment they realize you don't enforce consequences, that your forgiveness is on tap, that your loyalty outlasts logic, something shifts in them, not always consciously, not always with malice, but inevitably and quietly. And fatally, they begin to test the limits. A forgotten promise here, a dismissive tone there, a selfish decision rationalized by stress, by trauma, by anything but character. And when you absorb it, when you smile through it, when you minimize your pain so that they don't feel guilt, they register that as permission. And from there, the pattern doesn't explode. It seeps. You won't notice the shift at first, not because it's subtle, but because you've been conditioned to expect that being the bigger person means accepting the smaller behavior. You've told yourself that being good means being quiet, that being mature means being endlessly understanding, that being kind means never holding people accountable because they're doing their best. But here's the truth no one teaches you. Some people choose to hurt the ones least likely to walk away. They don't pick the strongest, they pick the softest. They don't prey on the loud, they prey on the loyal. They don't go after those who will fight back. They go after those who will explain their pain away in the name of empathy. And once they know you're the type to give them the benefit of the doubt, even when the evidence is stacked like corpses behind them, they stop fearing your departure, because why would they? You've trained them, by way of your tolerance, that they can cause damage and still be welcome, and that's not on them. That's on you, not because you deserved it, but because you allowed it to continue long after the pattern became clear. Because deep down, you were still hoping your kindness would inspire them to stop, that your unwavering goodness would awaken something noble in them, that your patience would earn their transformation. But it didn't, because they weren't confused. They were calculating, and your kindness wasn't a miracle. It was a mirror, one they refused to look into, one they broke and then blamed for the cuts. And when you finally pulled away, not with fury, not with accusations, but with quiet dignity, they didn't own the damage. They flipped the narrative. Suddenly, you became the cold one. You became the heartless one. You became the one who gave up too easily. They cried. They reminisced. They said things like, "I never thought you'd be the one to walk away." As if the entire story began at the moment you stopped bleeding for them, not the 100 times they handed you the knife. And the more polite your exit, the more confused everyone around you seemed to be, because the world doesn't understand boundaries wrapped in grace. They understand screaming. They understand anger. They understand explosions, not silent revolutions. So when you leave with poise, with silence, with a goodbye that sounds more like a breath than a slam, they call you cold. But what they're really saying is that they miss the version of you who never knew how to walk away. Because now that you've chosen peace over performance, they're left standing in the echo of a silence they never expected from someone they thought they could always manipulate. And that silence, your silence, is their first real consequence. It's the mirror they refuse to face, now staring back at them without expression, without softness, without the cushion of your second chances. So let them call you too nice. Let them say you changed. Let them twist your dignity into cruelty, because the truth is, you didn't change. You simply stopped being available for misuse. And if they can't tell the difference between kindness and compliance, between grace and gullibility, between forgiveness and access, then their confusion is no longer your responsibility. You are not heartless for walking away. You are not cruel for refusing to explain yourself. You are not wrong for deciding that your energy deserves better than endless repair jobs on people who break you with precision. You're just done being the one who always gives more. And if they say you were too good, believe them. Because what they really meant was, you were too good to me, and I thought you'd never leave. The truth is, you don't owe them a conversation. You don't owe them a response. You don't owe them another opportunity to twist your clarity into confusion. Another moment of your stillness disrupted by their performance. Another breath spent justifying why you chose peace over pain. Why you chose self-respect over sentimentality. Why you walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. Because the real ending doesn't come when they apologize, it comes when you stop waiting for one dot. It doesn't arrive with closure or permission or some final talk that makes everything feel neatly wrapped and emotionally resolved. It arrives silently, inwardly, when the part of you that once craved their understanding no longer needs it to move forward. They don't need to get it. They don't need to agree. They don't even need to know you're gone, because true endings are never declared. They are chosen quietly, internally, in a moment of stillness when you finally realize that your silence is not the absence of emotion. It is the full presence of wisdom. You are not cold. You are not unkind. You are not heartless. You have simply seen enough. You have listened long enough, not to them, but to yourself. And when the voice inside you finally became louder than the noise they left behind, when your intuition no longer needed confirmation to be valid, when your energy no longer begged for reciprocation, that was the ending. It happened the moment you didn't reply. The moment you didn't flinch when their name came up. The moment you felt nothing, not anger, not longing, not even relief, just space. And that space, that silence, that vast, untouchable distance, they no longer know how to cross. That is your closure. Because if they really wanted to make things right, they would have done it when they had. You. Not now. Not after the damage. Not after the withdrawal. Not after your soul had to rebuild itself. Brick by brick in the aftermath of their negligence. They had access to the softest parts of you and still chose to hurt you. They saw your grace, your empathy, your patience, and turned it into a canvas for their chaos. And now that you've withdrawn, now that your eyes no longer shimmer with blind hope, they feel the shift, not in your words, but in your absence. And though they may try again, with messages, with memories, with tears or silence or subtweets, or late night nostalgia, you won't respond. Not because you're petty, not because you want them to suffer, but because you finally know that some relationships do not end with war, they end with wisdom. You don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need to explain to be justified. You don't need to stay to prove you loved. You loved. You stayed. You tried. And now you leave. Not dramatically, not bitterly, not performatively. You leave with posture. You leave with poise. You leave like someone who finally realizes that the highest form of self-respect is quiet, removal, the kind that doesn't slam doors, but closes them so completely they disappear behind the architecture of your peace. So if they ever ask why you're so silent, let them wonder. If they ever accuse you of changing, let them be right. If they ever say you became cold, know that what they really mean is, you became untouchable. Because when you've done the inner work, when you've healed the wound they created, When you've stood in your own ruin long enough to rebuild something sacred, you don't come back to chaos, no matter how sweet the invitation. And no, you don't owe them closure. You don't owe them access. You don't owe them softness. You don't owe them anything, because the ending already happened, not when you walked away, but when you stopped turning back. So if anyone ever made you feel guilty for choosing your own peace, if anyone ever looked you in the eye and called your distance cruel, if anyone ever painted your boundaries as betrayal, then let this be your reminder. You are not required to keep bleeding just because they say your silence cuts too deep. And if you've ever been called cold for protecting your calm, heartless for refusing to re-enter chaos, too strong for no longer playing the emotional puppet, then brother, let me say this clearly. Welcome home. You've just found the place where the quiet ones are heard. You've just found the place where stillness is honored. You've just found the place where men no longer apologize for saving themselves. This is true Stoic way, and you belong here.